everyone. My name is Jennifer Van Ostren, and on behalf of ACRL and Choice, I'd like to welcome you to today's program, Share, Chorus, and Open Access, What You Need to Know, sponsored by SAGE and featuring David Ross, Judy Rutenberg, and Howard Ratner. Today's discussion is one in a series of sponsored webinars from ACRL and Choice that addresses new ideas, developments, and products of interest to the academic library community. Free to users, these structured 60-minute live presentations provide the opportunity for interactive discussions of important new issues and developments in academic librarianship by librarians, vendors, authors, and other interested stakeholders. Before we get started, I'd like to point out a few features of the webinar software. In the main area of the screen, you can follow along with the presentation materials. Along the left-hand side, you will also see a Q&A panel that you can use to submit questions or comments. We will spend some time responding to your questions during the program, so please feel free to submit these throughout. And finally, please note that today's program will be recorded and all registrants will receive follow-up instructions on how to access the archived version. And now for some more information about our speakers today. David Ross, as Executive Publisher for Open Access, is responsible for the strategic direction of Open Access, OA, in SAGE's journals program, as well as managing SAGE's flagship OA titles, SAGE Open Engineering, SAGE Open Medicine, and SAGE Open Medical Case Reports. Alongside this, David is also responsible for the development of the systems, process, and policies that support SAGE's OA publishing. David has a rich history of experience with OA. He managed SAGE's initial venture into OA publishing, a partnership with Hindawi, and was a founding board member of the Open Access Scholarly Publishers Association. David also represented SAGE as one of the publishing partners for the Study of Open Access Publishing, or SOAP, a 2-year project launched in 2009 with the aim to broadly disseminate a description and analysis of models of open access publishing. Joining SAGE in 2000, David has played a key role in the development of both SAGE's journal catalog and OA publishing program. Having joined as SAGE's business development manager, David has since held a number of roles including senior editor, head of commercial sales, and engineering publisher. Previous to his roles at SAGE, David worked at Kluwer Academic Publishers, Chapman and Hall Thompson, and Arnold Publications. David can be followed on Twitter at DRossUK2011.
Okay, thanks for the introduction, Jem. Before I introduce our two speakers and their presentations, I thought it'd be useful to provide a little context about why we're here discussing both Share and Chorus. Open access as a concept has been around for a couple of decades now. Some dated back to the early 90s with the creation of Archive, followed a few years later by PubMed Central. But there's no denying that there's been a rapid increase in both its uptake and its profile in the last few years. In the last 2 or 3 years, particularly, there's been a lot more engagement from funding agents globally. Now, I've been closely involved in the OA movement for over about 10 years now, and I call it a movement consciously because many proponents advocate for it with religious zeal. But for years, the general consensus was that nothing will change until the funders get involved. And they were seen as the parties that could actually change all the behaviour, actually force the movement. Well, the funders are now getting involved. And specifically we're here because the largest collective funders in the world, the US federal funding agencies, are getting involved. The action was prompted by the OSTP, the Office of Science and Technology Policy in the White House. They issued a directive in a memo from John Holden, the director, on February the 22nd, February 2013. The key points are summarised in the slide you hope you're all seeing now. But every federal research agency with an expenditure over $100 million per annum has to produce a public access plan to ensure that articles and data resulting from the funding of research be made freely accessible online to the public. A 12-month embargo is set as a guideline, but agencies are allowed to put forward a case for lengthening that. That might be of particular interest to humanities and social scientists who have different user behaviour on articles. And an initial deadline was set for submissions by the agencies to the OSTP for August 22nd, 2013. There has been, a deafening silence since then, really. But the agencies have been formulating their plans, the OSTP have been talking about it, and the first agency, the Department of Energy, issued their intention, or indicated their intention 3 months ago. And I'll come back to the detail of that in a moment, but I just wanted to focus on the last point. That it was very clear in the OSTP directive that publications and metadata must be stored in an archival solution that provides long-term preservation and access. I think the key thing here is that there needs to be some structure to this. It can't just be authors sticking this stuff on their website. It's got to be organised. There's got to be an organising organisation behind it. So what happened in the intervening time was that people began to discuss various ways the plans could actually be implemented and how they'd be rolled out. You know, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of articles a year published by authors based in hundreds of universities throughout the US. Whatever the detail of the plans, the question was how on earth is it going to be coordinated? And into this space stepped Share and Chorus. The following presentations will provide you with all you need to know about these two initiatives. But just before they do, I wanted to give a very brief overview of the Department of Energy's plans. And not to go into the detail of this specifically, but just I thought it'd be useful for everyone to see this is, this is going to give an indication of how the rest of the agencies follow, and is likely to be how the authors, your faculty members are actually going to have to behave. So the Department of Energy released a public access plan on July 2014. It's all going to be run through their Pages portal, which is a portal that's been developed specifically for the by the DOE for this. They're going to have to, it's a bit of a hierarchy. What they're saying is that if the publisher's version of record is available, then that is going to be linked to through Chorus, respecting any embargo the publisher wishes to set. But that's the first preference. If that's not available, then they'll link to the author-accepted manuscript as the final peer-reviewed version before it's had any production work done it, and that will be deposited in an institutional repository by the author. There is a third choice where the DOE will actually host the material themselves, but that's pretty much, it's only going to be a select few papers. That's the fact of the matter for all scientists that are funded by the DOE, and this is what they're going to have to actually implement. So it's Share and Chorus which hope to provide the solutions to this. And with no further ado, I'll hand over to Judy Rutenberg to talk about Share. Bit of background, Judy is the Program Director for the Association of Research Libraries, Transforming Research Libraries Program. Her responsibilities include serving as ARL Staff Liaison to the Accessibility and Universal Design Working Group, the e-research working group, and the Transforming Special Collections in the Digital Age working group. When she has time, Judy is also responsible for managing the SHARE project, that's the Shared Access Research Ecosystem, and I'll now hand over to her.
Thank you, David. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you to ACRL and Choice for providing this venue. SHARE first appeared by name as a joint paper issued by 3 higher education associations in June of 2013, ARL, AAU, and APLU. This was the document's opening sentence. Research universities are long-lived and are mission-driven to generate, make accessible, and preserve over time new knowledge and understanding. Although SHARE as a proposed set of services has repositioned and evolved in the last 18 months, its essential reason for being is still well represented by this statement. SHARE's focus and goal in that development draft was on university digital repositories, IRs, and what it would take to interconnect them so that they would serve as a network of distributed but interoperable repositories for the increase in publicly available research output mandated by OSTP to federal science agencies. The focus on repositories was not new for ARL or for the library community, nor was it entirely new for ARL and AAU, which has an active joint task force on scholarly communication, looking at the role of institutional repositories in the scholarly communications ecosystem. In the process of gathering community feedback to that initial SHARE paper, we learned a lot about the challenges we faced in implementing the network of repositories vision. Challenges of infrastructure, workflow, and policy, very broadly speaking. As David laid out so nicely in his intro, federal policies for public access are part of something much larger, a longer arc that includes an increase in campus open access and deposit policies and more upstream efforts, such as the requirement of data management plans. We faced infrastructure challenges in the variation in capacity among our repositories and the lack of common standards guidelines that would render them truly interoperable at this time. On the workflow side, everyone is rightly concerned with administrative burden on both the researcher and on research administration. So all of this, the opportunity we saw, that SHARE saw in this set of challenges, was to try to optimize the systems and strategies within higher education to manage the research process more efficiently, both to meet demands for greater access to research output and demands for data about research on campus for a variety of reasons. So we identified a problem space that virtually everyone in the ecosystem shared and could get behind solving, one of knowing who is producing what and under whose auspices. So this is critical to a wide range of stakeholders, funders, sponsored research offices on campus, government agencies providing the funding, tenure and promotion committees, repository managers, and the research community itself. So with a planning grant from the Sloan Foundation, we hired both strategic and technical personnel, Greg Tannenbaum and Eric Celeste, and the SHARE vision took shape as 4 interconnected layers to be developed with some overlap. The first would be, or is, a notification service to address the problem of knowing what is being produced and knowing that in a timely way. There would also be a registry or catalog layer with data about all forms of research output, not just publications and not just data sets. A discovery layer to help interested parties find research outputs across repositories, and some kind of content aggregation layer that could facilitate data and text mining of research output, as well as other community-driven value-added services. So in its fully realized state, SHARE will let key stakeholders know when research is released in a timely, structured, and comprehensive manner. It will provide an inventory of what's available within publicly accessible repositories. And SHARE will facilitate discovery of and access to content across those repositories. SHARE will expose this content so the community can reuse, mine, and build services on top of that corpus. And all of these layers taken together give campus-driven research outputs their widest exposure and ensure that they can be broadly reused. SHARE is now supported generously by the Institute of Museum and Library Services and the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation. Among the first decisions of this joint award was to sign an agreement with the Center for Open Science, a Charlottesville, Virginia-based nonprofit technology startup with a mission statement highly aligned with SHARE's. The Center for Open Science, or CAUSE, created the Open Science Framework as a set of tools and services to support openness in the research process throughout the life cycle of a project. CAUSE began building the SHARE notification service prototype in June of this year. So what is the notification service and what will it do? It will track what we're calling research release events, the availability somewhere of articles, preprints, data sets, but also presentations, posters, figures, data management plans, programming projects, researcher profiles, and more. SHARE stakeholders then include everyone who might be a consumer or want to know about these events, including campus repositories, sponsored research officers and funders, but also publishers, current research information systems, even researchers and the general public. Today, each of these entities must arrange with one another directly if they want to share data. This makes for a chaotic environment in which accountability is difficult to attain. So the SHARE notification service will make arrangements with each source so that we receive reports from a wide array of them, we hope all of them in time. We turn this into a timely, structured, and comprehensive stream of notifications that any consumer can take advantage of as a stream of data and provide a record of these notifications that can be queried by researchers and others in populating repositories, preparing tenure review materials, creating progress reports, or doing compliance checks. The Share Notification Service is an agile and open source development process, and you are welcome to visit the GitHub repository and wiki to follow and participate in the Share project as it adds providers or sources of data and information about those sources, such as their metadata sharing policies. And that's github.com/Center for Open Science, all one word, /share. In the first instance of the prototype, data is being harvested from a variety of institutional, disciplinary, and agency repositories and hundreds of publishers via Crossref. This fall, we are expanding the prototype to include 10 more campus IRs, additional sources of data sets, and the DMP tool. While a data management plan is not itself a research release event, it is an early indicator, the kind of administrative information about data that consumers may want to track, knowing there's more to come, and as an additional source of metadata about a project. The development team at CAUSE is also working on a push API for a more scalable method of adding providers beyond harvest, which is what's currently underway. SHARE has an advisory board made up of university librarians, research administrators, and association leaders. You can see the full list of anyone involved in SHARE at the URL displayed here. As of this month, SHARE now has a director drawn from the association membership. Tyler Walters, Dean of Libraries at Virginia Tech University, which is both an ARL and an APLU member, will serve a 2-year term as SHARE's director while remaining in his position at Virginia Tech. And there are community working groups, librarians, publishers, repository managers, research administrators, and third-party service providers, including my co-panelist on this webinar, that are interested in seeing the notification service and SHARE succeed as a central, open piece of infrastructure for the whole community to use. The working groups include about 60 people, there are 4 of them, so altogether, who represent pieces of the infrastructure that already exist, as SHARE intends to rely on existing standards where available. So the notification service is a pipeline that modifies the data flowing through it from the sources I mentioned as little as possible in order to provide the data as quickly as possible. Its job is to build relationships with providers and make it easy for those providers to contribute reports of new resources to SHARE. But we realize that many consumers of SHARE data will want it enhanced and more neatly collated. So the registry, our second layer, will enhance those reports with attributes that can be culled from other sources, pull together reports of the same resources, and identify resources that are related to one another. Like the notification service, the registry will be designed primarily to serve other systems. So to really facilitate human consumption, such as researchers using SHARE to discover the work of colleagues, a SHARE discovery layer will also be required, or existing discovery systems leveraged to be able to access the data store of the registry. And finally, to make these research assets truly reusable will depend less on technology and more on policies and professional research practices and norms encouraging openness and also disclosure of that openness. This is a huge opportunity space for libraries and library professionals as we become more involved in the process of research, further upstream in the research lifecycle and not exclusively with capturing the products of research. Universities and libraries have a role and responsibility to steward both process and product in order to extend the impact of research on innovation and for social benefit. And many librarians are providing research data management services and growing their repositories to do exactly that kind of work. So the SHARE Advisory Board has a group looking at reuse and licensing question from the angle of institutional policy. But the extent to which the research community moves toward openness, as David suggested, and the repository community embraces standards around that disclosure, the more effective partner SHARE will be to federal agencies or to any entity encouraging broader access to and impact of research. So thank you very much for the opportunity to participate in this webinar. You can visit us on the web, follow us on Twitter, or email share@arl.org. Back to you, David.
Great. Thanks very much, Judy. So just to remind everyone, there is going to be a Q&A session that we run after this. We're not going to take questions on SHARE right now. We're going to wait until the end, until after Howard Ratner's done his presentation on Chorus. And after that, we'll move into the questions. So please stop sending them over now. So I'm going to introduce Howard Ratner. He's over the last 2 decades, Howard's played a key role in developing innovative technology solutions that have transformed scholarly communications. He co-founded and chaired the not-for-profit ORCID, the Open Research and Contributor ID system, and was active in the establishment of DOIs and the founding and technical development of Crossrest itself and clocks. He's now the driving force behind CORE, and this is its very first service, Chorus, the Clearinghouse for Open Research in the United States. So please go ahead, Howard.
Well, thank you, David, and thanks to SAGE and ACRL Choice for giving me the opportunity to introduce you to Chorus. And Chorus is a solution for public access. It focuses on 5 things: identification, discovery, access, preservation, and compliance. So as David said, the OSTP memo issued in February of last year, and then since then, in October of 2013, Chorus publishers have been providing public access to the best available version, either the accepted author manuscript or the version of record from their website post-embargo, or sooner if paid for by an Oracle processing charge. Open APIs enable content syndication and search services, and articles archived via clocks, Portico, and other government-sponsored archives. We can also link to data repositories when they're available, but obviously that's a very new area, and so we're watching that very carefully. The key thing to note is that Chorus is up and running, and we're already working with agencies. So Chorus is a broad coalition of scholarly publishers formed to develop, implement, and steward a partnership with the federal research funders for providing public access to the peer-reviewed publications that report on funded research. And as we have evolved from a group of publishers that were dealing with the government since spring of 2011, you can see here that we've got a great variety of publishers and scholarly societies that make up the Chorus board. You see that we're largely not-for-profit, so AIPP, APS, IEEE, OUP, and ACS, and we now have over 100 signatories. It's also important to note that even within our bylaws, we have to have a majority of not-for-profit. So taking a look at our supporting organizations, you can say here again that it's very wide variety. So it's from small to large, from not-profit to commercial, from purely American on the left-hand side there to international. And you can note some names like Hindawi, RSC, the Royal Society, Nature Publishing Group, Taylor and Francis, and of course, SAGE is listed there too. So where were we and where are we now and where are we heading? So back in 2013, from the time that the OSTP issued its memo, we were in ramp-up phase, and we started off with some initial funding from AAP. We then delivered the proof of concept in August, and then we immediately went into our pilot phase in September through July of 2014. And along the way, just because it's you have to do technology and business at the same time, because that's what's fun, is we actually incorporated as a separate not-for-profit 501c3 public charity called CORE. And in 2013, we started doing some fundraising, and we got that first initial fundraising, which came from publishers. And then we actually launched into production in July of 2014 this year. And I was happy to see that the U.S. Department of Energy announced a partnership on the 4th of August with Chorus. So where are we now? Well, we're in our second round of fundraising, which was considerably less than our first one, because we're now also acquiring members. So we're now half and half between sponsorship and membership. And we're also exploring international ideas because we all know that this public access thing is not just here in the United States. So over the last year, the Chorus board and I have had countless meetings with government agencies, teaching them about Chorus and what publishers have to offer them regarding delivering public access. The one story that I will relate is by going into one agency, when I walk out, I'm convinced that I've only learned about one agency. Every single agency is different. Every single agency has different needs and nuances. But Chorus and, in fact, even SHARE are trying to find ways to work with all of these agencies and make it easy for the researchers to comply. But why Chorus? So Chorus addresses the priorities of all stakeholders alike. It's sustainable, it's cost-effective, it's containing publisher spending, it's cutting funder overhead, and it's free to funders, academic institutions, and libraries, and the public. Again, it's the publishers that are footing this bill. Widespread access to research is a good thing, and it's at the very core of our mission as publishers. But as we all know, coming up with a sustainable and scalable approach to delivering free public access to scholarly content reporting on funded research in the U.S. is easier said than done. The challenge is to develop something that works for everyone, ensuring the reliable reporting, review, dissemination, and long-term availability of research literature. So we spent a lot of time identifying the key stakeholders for Chorus, and we've identified more than a dozen, but here are what we consider perhaps the top 5. And so in the upper left, you see Alan, and he's our agency representative. And he wants to meet the OSTP guidelines and measure grantee and agency compliance with the guidelines. But he also wants to show how his agency's investments are having impact, or ROI, and providing access. Then there's Rachel on the other side. So she's our researcher. Now, she's very different from Alan. She wants to obtain funding for her research. She also wants to comply with the funding agency requirements, but she wants to avoid doing extra administrative work, and we want to help her. Then there's Lottie the librarian, the thing I perhaps learned the most about from my share colleagues. She wants to make sure that her patrons have access to the content they need, and she wants researchers to comply with funding agency requirements. Because you have to understand that the librarian has a growing role as helping researchers comply with the grant requirements. And then there's Peter on the lower right, and he wants access to content to research a problem and drive economic development, but he potentially also wants to have content connected to learning tools. And then we've got Penny, the one I'm most familiar with. And Penny wants to help authors and institutions comply with funder mandates, retain traffic on her websites, and keep content in context. So a key principle of Chorus is to be cost-effective. We are leveraging the existing infrastructure of the scholarly community. For identification and discovery, we're using Crossref and its FundRef service, as well as ORCID, the Open Researcher and Contributor ID. We also, for preservation, use the big dark archiving services of Portico and Clocks. And now keep in mind, again, that Chorus is free to use for institutions and researchers and agencies. So how does this all work? Well, I'm not going to go into a grand amount of detail, but let's first talk about access. Because again, Chorus is about access to articles reporting on funded research. Articles are made publicly accessible on publishers' websites after the embargo period expires or sooner if an author or funder has paid an article processing charge to do so. The reader gets access to the best available version, either the accepted author manuscript or the version of record. Both are served from the publisher's website. But one of the things that we really concentrated on when designing Chorus is minimizing the work for everyone and when it comes to complying with funding agency policies. Everyone involved in the process, the funder, the researcher, the publisher, and the librarian, have their real jobs. And any time spent chasing compliance and jumping through different hoops means time taken away from those important jobs. We want the researcher to spend their time doing research, not tracking down a complex set of rules and regulations. Through Chorus, we've built compliance into the very regular publication process that they're already familiar with. There's no additional effort for the researcher beyond identifying their funding sources as they submit a paper. So here's an example of a manuscript tracking system that they're very familiar with, and it could look like any of them coming from eJournal Press, Scholar One, Editorial Manager, or Bench Press. So what they'll be presented with is a screen that might look something similar to this. Chorus does not dictate the way the screen looks. However, what Chorus is doing is it's providing the connection to the funder names. And so Chorus is using Crossref's FundRef system, which has over 8,000 terms in its taxonomy. And then the researcher can then put in the grant number and also who the grant recipient is. Once they've done that, it will then be paired up with the article's DOI and all of the bibliographic metadata that goes with it and sent into Crossref when the article is published. And this follows a very regular path, which is conducted by thousands of publishers. So once that's been done, we can do lots of interesting things. So on the left-hand side there, you see identification. But once we have that identification, we can then do discovery. And I'm happy to see the Department of Energy is actually using our system to load up their pages system. So there's a smaller diagram of their beta pages system. And then also on the bottom side, you've got compliance. So we've actually developed some dashboards. And the purpose of doing this is to show the agencies what actually the publishers are doing. And so we're actually tracking things like what articles have been identified with the FundRef identifier, which of those have agreeable licenses to the agency, which of those actually have publicly accessible files, and lastly, which of those actually have suitable archive arrangements with either Clocks or Portico. We actually get a feed from Portico, which tells us what DOIs they actually have been archived. I'm going to move on. So what about Chorus and Share? I get this question a lot. So really, Chorus's objective is to interoperate with scholarly repositories and other systems providing access to scholarly articles. And as you heard from Judy, we've agreed to jointly work on persistent identifiers, metrics that make sense for us, and also the Share notification system. And we're also exploring other areas of collaboration as they seem to make sense. And this is why, in particular, I very happily sit on and I'm an active member of the Share Workflow Working Group. So what is it about Chorus and academia? So at many universities, it falls to the librarians or the grant officers to make sure that the researchers on campus are in compliance with funder regulations. By creating one centralized system for use across a broad range of funding agencies and thousands of journals, administrative compliance efforts are minimized. There'll be one place to go to track every researcher funded by the agencies that use Chorus. Better yet, university administrators can tap into the very same compliance tracking tools that funding agencies use themselves. Keep in mind, all of these are open. With Chorus's use of open APIs, dashboards, and search tools, everyone's on the same page. I want to thank you very much. And honestly, we're growing and we're changing, so we want you to help us help you. So if you want, become an academic supporter. So, all you got to do is go to www.chorusaccess.org, sign up. It costs you nothing, and we would love to hear from you. So thanks very much. Dave, back to you.
Great. Fantastic. Thanks, Howard. I think we'll all agree to excellent presentations. It's a lot clearer exactly what role they're both going to play. So please do send in any questions you have, and we'll start working through them. I'd like to start the ball rolling by asking both Judy and Howard, actually. Both Share and Chorus seem to be quite complementary in that they're addressing slightly different needs. So I just wondered whether how you two see these two organizations working together. Perhaps Judy can go first on that.
Sure. Yeah, thank you for that. I think, as Howard mentioned, there's a clear alignment of interest in certain areas, which are, which is truthfully the area that Share started with, this notification service and kind of knowing, being able to better identify publication activity, but not just publication activity, research activity broadly, being able to be notified about that, and kind of encouraging the community to enhance its adoption of metadata standards that will promote that clarity and visibility, such as ORCID and FundRef. And to the extent that, so the workflow that Howard showed with Chorus adding metadata to FundRef, you saw on our slide, on my provider slide, Crossref is a feed, or we're harvesting from Crossref into the notification service, and that enhanced metadata will improve the service. So, I think where it makes sense and where our interests align, we will talk. We will continue to work together.
Yeah, so the interesting thing, having been now involved with Share for quite a number of months now, is to understand where the overlap is, but also where we don't overlap. And there are a lot of research events that happen outside of the publishing realm that academia knows a lot about. And actually publishers know very little. And actually many publishers don't really want to be in that space. So that's fine, that's great. And that, I think, is a great area that Share is occupying, and that's one of the interesting things the identification system really could be about, as well as the registry. But then when you start to look at the various different areas around data, that's another area that's very open. And I think what's interesting for me is that Share has a great community there. And it's made up of research administrators, and it's made up of librarians, and I think what we could tap into is to understand what the needs are so that we can provide the right kind of dashboards and the right kind of workflows for that constituency.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense to me. I mean, I can see that, particularly, the knowledge that you'll get from the librarian's point of view, particularly because in my view, the publisher, it's clear to me that the librarians are likely to become, in some way, responsible as the gatekeepers or to ensuring compliance or making, or at the very least, educating their authors on how they actually approach this. So, yeah, I mean, I can totally understand how that level of information for you, for Chorus, would be invaluable. Okay, so the first question that's come in, can Howard please further explain how Chorus will display the final peer-reviewed manuscript? Is it that Chorus will display it unless the article is paid OA article, in which case the final published version will be shared?
Yeah, so to be clear, Chorus doesn't actually display the articles. It's actually the publisher's website that do. We point to those, and we make it transparent where you can get those. So the publishers that are already members have chosen to usually do that right off of the regular landing page that the DOI points to. So for an author manuscript, they might say this is a publicly accessible author manuscript. For a version of record, it might just say that this is now open after a given time. But again, it's done on the publisher's site, and it's done in a distributed manner.
And I think, again, from a publisher's point of view, that's one of the key benefits of this is that, there's just still this one version of record hosted in one place to stop the proliferation of distribution still. So, that's the next one.
Yeah, and then that's the other good point, thank you, David, is that publishers very firmly believe that they are the stewards of that content. And so when it comes time to adding information, so for instance, what some people call supplemental information or research data or new data, they could point to that. Or in addition, we do live in a world where there are sometimes corrections and retractions, and the publishers are the first ones that jump on those things.
Yeah, and we will be the gatekeepers of the. I mean, I think the version of record itself is kind of moving in an online-only world, but yeah, exactly, someone's got to have responsibility for it. Okay, the next question, also for Howard, I believe. The OSTP memo also called for public access to research data. How does Chorus help authors meet this requirement? I'd actually also extend that out to be interested to see how Judy would say how Share might also resolve that issue. But Howard first, perhaps.
Okay, Howard first. So at this point, it's really research and discussion. So the framework that we've built, which is mainly around the DOI, can absolutely work for research data. And so we have other players, so beyond Crossref, like DataCite and others, which are using DOIs, and we will make use of that over time. But right now, in fact, just this very week, I'm attending at least 3 different data workshops to understand where this is all going. And there are lots of groups from the RMAP initiative to the National Data Service Initiative to the RDA, which is primarily based in Europe. And there are more that I keep discovering. So really trying to understand where this can be normalized and where Chorus can play is the activity that we're doing today.
Okay, and Judy, what about Share's view on the data side?
So Share's view is that, data is, we are looking at data as a research release event, the availability of data, just like a publication or a preprint or another form of output. So it was, and we are working with, as I mentioned, the DMP tool and Data One in order to get early providers, at least even in the prototype, to see what that looks like in terms of notifications. But this is, this is again the sort of opportunity space for higher education, which has a host of reasons to want to better manage its research data for the process of doing that research and for continuity and reproducibility and all of those reasons, in addition to various policies requesting sharing or openness. So I think the Share's focus as a set of services and with the community that we've brought together different players within higher education will address both the management and stewardship of data that will, and again, disclosures around what can be done with that data will feed into our effort.
And I think that's an important point to reiterate, actually. The whole data question is still very much, out there. Solutions are under development. There is no, real consensus yet about exactly how we handle this problem. Everyone talks about open data, and you make the point that now's the time through initiatives like this to really, authors, librarians, whoever it is, want to get involved, and actually this is an opportunity to shape it, because sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and I think from the publisher's perspective, the area that they tend to focus on, at least the ones that I hear about from my members, is that it's the area where data meets up to the article, right? But we all know that there's a lot more data than that. And so as Judy said, this is really a narrow exploration. How much do we want to actually capture? And how do you then standardize on that? And how do you standardize across different disciplines if you need to? And so there's a lot of questions here. And so if you think about how many years it took us to get for the metadata regarding content, I'm imagining we've got years ahead of us also regarding data.
Yeah, and I think the fundamental, where's it going to be hosted? We're talking about terabytes of data for every single project. So yeah, it's a huge question. The third question, I'm new to open access area and just wanted to be sure I understand the models for Share and Chorus. So both of these tools can be used by academic libraries to access content, but they won't serve as an institutional repository for an individual library. Is this correct? I think yes is the answer.
Okay, I can answer. So no, I think that's, yes, Share is not itself a big repository. Right now, the data stores we're talking about with the notification service and the registry will be stores of metadata pointing to where content where research is available, research output is available in a distributed set of repositories. Now, that said, I think that the notion of building a common open piece of infrastructure for a distributed repository community may inspire behaviors around those repositories, either around the adoption of metadata standards or coming together on things like that, potentially doing some sort of specialization or even consolidation, but that's entirely up to the repository community that can avail itself of of the Share tool. So the idea is to be a service for that community.
Yeah, and equally, just as I mentioned that Chorus is not a repository for publisher data, it's not a repository for institutional data either. It is, however, a metadata repository and a pointer to all of these various different places.
Okay, fourth question. A question about Chorus. Will researchers be able to mine metadata or full text for textual analysis?
Yeah, great question. So some of the publishers are already very busy at work creating license reuse policies. This is one of the big efforts that we have going at Chorus, is for reuse licenses to become extremely transparent and available for people to access. So when you download that public access file, you'll be able to know what it is. Now, Chorus is not going to dictate to the publishers what exactly they have to put in there, but Chorus is making all of that extremely easy to find. And then we go the next step, which is Chorus is also enabling it so that you can have either through an IP address authentication or through a token authentication system, people will be able to access and do the things that they want to do in a very normalized manner from the publisher site. Again, you're going to harvest the information from the publisher site, follow the reuse terms provided by that publisher, and then either the token access or the IP access, which actually is piped through Chorus, you'll be able to access all of those things.
Okay, I hope that answers the question. So this is for both, and perhaps Judy can go first, as how I did the last question. Is either Share or Chorus involved in the development of a compliance monitor that institutions may use, like the NIH Public Access Compliance Monitor?
Right. So at this point, those kinds of services are the services that we, by building SHARE, by building this store of this resource, we will enable conversations on campus to be more effective sharing of information on campus that for the services of things like compliance, but also, again, as I mentioned, tenure and promotion files, faculty profile systems. There's a whole host of reasons why people on campus sitting in various offices want data about research. And right now we've got a lot of siloed systems and a lot of repetitive entry of that. And so we're talking about creating a tool which will enable services like that to be built. So at this point, there's no software development of a compliance tracker. What there is a piece of infrastructure badly needed that we're building so that we can enable better sharing of information and better tracking for for that as a really kind of prime use case, but others as well.
So Chorus already has a service that you can see live at dashboard.chorusaccess.org, which is, and when I say it's live in a very nimble and agile manner, meaning that we're changing the dashboards all the time because we want to improve them as we get feedback from agencies and institutions. So you can have a look at those, and those are based off of the agency needs. We have not yet endeavored to create an institutional need, but after my spending 2 days with the SHARE folks, I could see why that could be a very interesting thing, but that also plays into being able to identify the institutions very clearly within either the affiliations or by an ORCID or something along that line. But I think there's some room for exploration here, and when I've demonstrated the dashboards to some institutional administrators as well as librarians, they seem to be very interested.
And I think broadly the whole compliance issue is going to be key going forward here, and who's actually, I don't think any one person is going to end up going to have responsibility for compliance, but it's going to be all actors are going to have to be involved in it. I mean, just on the institutional identifiers, one of the things publishers are really struggling with because, the disambiguated institution of an author is not that easy to grab in an automatic way. It's something we work with.
Yeah, David, I totally agree with you. We totally embrace the idea that it's not going to just be one central silo. In fact, when I talk about our dashboards are just one visualization of the data. So if an institution or an agency, wants to come collect the metadata and create their own, more the merrier, because actually we can all learn to improve. And by doing these dashboards, the most important thing that I've always seen, because I've been in IT now for more than 30 years, is that by doing these dashboards, visualizing it, you can actually see where the gaps of information are. And this is where you can improve.
Yeah, and back to the universal standards and identifiers, that's the core to all that, so we can start exchanging all this information.
Mm-hmm.
Moving on to the next question, because we're getting a bit short on time, and there's a lot of questions still to come. Howard mentioned that the authors will identify the funding agency during the submission process. Is this done through a publisher's submission workflow, or do authors need to manually do this through the Chorus website?
Right. So there's actually 2 ways that my publishers are doing this, and you could argue even 3. So way 1 is that the author is prompted, or the contributing author is prompted at the time of manuscript submission, and sometimes they actually do it at manuscript acceptance. But it's a screen that all modern manuscript tracking systems now have, and that's prompting again with that FundRef taxonomy. So that's way 1. But what some other publishers are doing, actually they're choosing to mine the information out of the affiliation information. So they're providing more instructions into their author guide, and then they're doing a mine. And the third way, and this is the one I like the most, is that there are publishers that are actually prompting the author, so they're getting the metadata up front. They're then mining that information and using that as a check, and then they're asking the author one more time to double check this at proof stage. That's my favorite, but obviously that's the most expensive one, but that will probably render the most valid information. But this is a growing thing, and as we're getting more and more data, we're discovering more and more proper ways to do these things and developing some best practices. But you're not actually entering the data at Chorus. Chorus is acting as the collector, and Chorus is acting as the guide to the publishers.
Yeah, and I will back that say the publishers see this as kind of being their role, and whether the first step is making it mandatory, but historically it hasn't been mandatory to indicate your funding data, your funding source, and then there's the verification process, which Howard talks about, which obviously is a huge job, but I think it is a space that we collectively think that we need to step into. So stepping back a bit from the detail, going at the macro level, are the efforts of Chorus in developing a discovery component duplicative of SHARE's efforts to develop a discovery engine? Again, perhaps Judy can lead on this.
Sure. I mean, discovery to share, this is, I mean, what we're talking about is encouraging more sharing of research and more visibility, more impact, more reach. We're talking about discovery. There are many different, there are going to be many different paths to discovery. Building a registry of open data that can be searched by any discovery tool, is sort of in the interest of promoting research reach and impact. So there will be many. There won't just be one sort of discovery out there, and that, yeah, that's my answer.
So my comment on this is I agree that there are now many different ways to do discoveries. No matter how you tell a researcher or the public to do their research, they will find another way to do it. So they're going to search through their social media, they're going to search through Google, they're going to search through Bing, they're going to search through PubMed itself, whatever. They're going to search through Pages if they're interested in what the Department of Energy has to offer. And equally, they potentially could search through Chorus. Chorus is not 100% in the search game, but understands that it needs to create a prototype system just to give examples of what you can do with this metadata. We would be extremely happy for other people to take our metadata and develop their systems, but we know we have to provide examples. And the other thing I'd say is that what I've been learning about SHARE is that SHARE is very broad, and that's a good thing. So there's a lot of data that SHARE is going to have that is outside of publisher content that potentially would be in the SHARE system, but wouldn't necessarily be in the Chorus system.
Yes, I think that's right. I mean, we have an expansive view of research output that it's exactly right.
Yeah, I think the phrase you can't is a research event, isn't it? Really, that's the kind of thing that matters to you. It's not really the article or the data; it's the whole thing. I think that's a fundamental difference. So next question again for Howard. How does Chorus solve the problem of access to the articles? So problem of access to the articles are preserved if the publisher goes bankrupt or otherwise pulls the content. There is a huge problem that PubMed Central already solves. Why do we need Chorus?
Right. It's a great question. So to be a member of Chorus, and again, there are two types of members. There's a publisher member and there's an affiliate member. The affiliate members are mostly services around the publishing community. But to be a publishing member, you are signing on to say that you are going to archive your content in one of the approved services. So right now that's Portico and Clocks. But what we've also done is we've gone the next step. And the next step is we've worked it out with Portico and soon with Clocks, where there will be an additional rider on there. So if a publisher reneges on its deal, then basically an agency can choose to trigger it and make it live. I should also note that it's very normal for both Portico and Clocks to trigger content if someone has gone out of business or if a publisher chooses to no longer publish that particular journal. That is actually built into their DNA. I don't need to do anything to make that happen. But what's new about it is now if a publisher has been making things publicly accessible and reneges on that deal, now the agency can actually come along, do some investigation, and if they don't like what they see, they can actually trigger that at one of these dark archives.
And I'd encourage everyone to go and have a look at both the Portico and Clocks sites. I mean, they do this. They have done it, and it's there. I wouldn't say it's open access because it's not freely licensed, but it's free to read. Just go in and have a look and see how they archive this material, and it is publishers that have either gone out of business or journals that have just folded. So they're in existence already. So could both please speak to the integration of ORCID in both processes?
Judy, would you like to go first?
Sure. I'm so glad somebody asked that. If, as we are harvesting data out of institutional repositories, out of other sorts of repositories, author identification is a big uneven question out there, and if there's sort of one thing that institutions could do, that repositories could do, that to encourage the adoption of ORCID, so that that essential identifier would be part of the metadata going into the notification service. That small step sort of across the system would be a huge benefit.
Yeah. As David mentioned, I'm one of the co-founders of ORCID, so obviously I have a historical interest in making ORCID happen. But as far as Chorus is concerned, ORCID is a very big play regarding greasing the wheels. It makes things just so much easier when you actually have an ORCID. As an example, one of the things that I've learned that agencies really have a problem with is, besides the fact of trying to track where content is that is coming from their grantees, they equally have a problem tracking content that has been authored by some of their staff or employees, which they refer to often as intramural research. That is actually very difficult currently to pull out within an article's metadata. But if you had an ORCID, it'd be so much easier. So in a world where ORCID actually was prevalent, would be a world where so much better identification and therefore some better compliance and reporting could be done. In addition to that, I would say that publishers have been engaging with ORCID for like the last 2 years, and many of the managed tracking systems are now, again, all prompt for it, but through the efforts of OSTP and now what's going on with Chorus, and now it's going on with Share, and now it's going on with DOE, publishers are seeing the need. So before it was, oh, this is a nice to have, but they're now seeing the raison d'etre for this.
Yeah, I mean, I'd echo that. I mean, ORCID would solve so many problems for us as publishers in this new world of needing to identify that it goes way beyond this problem. So, yeah, as an industry, we're very much getting behind it. So, very quick last question. I think we need to run out of time after that. Just to let everyone know that any questions that we haven't actually managed to get to today, we will be answering, in writing. We'll go through them and try and answer them all, and they will be posted at Sage Connections blog, and also they'll be distributed to all registrants. But, so very last question. How do institutions participate in the Share and Chorus systems? Is participation free or is it fee-based? And I think I'll let Howard go first, because I think the answer is quite straightforward for him.
Yeah, so it's free, but we would love to hear from you. So either go to our website, use our services, and give us feedback, or potentially become one of our advisors and tell us the way that we can really help.
Okay, and over to Judy.
Right. There is no fee for participating in Share. We are, if you run a repository and would like to participate in the prototype or its next stage, contact us. Yes, there's an email address, share@arl.org. Also love to hear ideas, questions for participation, wide open space.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a general takeaway from a lot of this is, get in touch with both Share and Chorus, and then help work with them to develop, the solutions that work for you. So, I'm afraid we're out of time. I think we'll all agree that was really, really illuminating, and we'll follow up with answers to the other questions. For now, I'll just hand back to Jen to wrap up.
Great. Thanks, David, and thanks to Judy and Howard. I would like to give you all a virtual round of applause for spending time with us today and sharing some great information. We greatly appreciate your insights. As a reminder, we have recorded today's program, so be on the lookout for a follow-up email from ACRL and Choice that will include instructions on how to access the archived version. And thanks again to all our participants